Clara Granger barred the barn aisle with a straw broom. In her other hand, she held a water bucket, and against Abner Sutton's chest, she pressed a steaming tin mug, as if his life depended on drinking it. Then a brass tally stamped with Frank Nash's mark slipped from her apron, and she trapped it beneath her boot before Abner could finish reading the words, 3 weeks unpaid. "Sit down, Mr. Sutton, or I will pour that cider into your boots." Her voice held steady. Her white knuckles did not. Abner stood in the snow-dusted corridor with both hands around the mug. A lantern burned on the workbench. Behind Clara, his gelding pushed his head over the stall gate, breathing mist into the bitter air. The picture might have looked almost peaceful if Clara had not been guarding a broker's tally, as though it could send her back onto the road. Moss stretched his neck toward the broom bristles. "Do not," Clara warned him in Polish. The horse withdrew at once. Abner, who had owned Moss for 9 years and had never inspired such obedience, took a cautious drink. The cider was hot with cinnamon and molasses. It burned feeling back into his throat after 2 hours in the brush with his coat wrapped around a premature calf. His right shoulder throbbed from the old break. Every joint carried the particular deep ache of a man who had worked alone through too many winters and considered rest a form of negligence. "The calf cannot pay your wages," Clara said. "If you fall sick, Mr. Nash will say I failed here. Then he will dock me again." Abner looked from her frightened face to the boot hiding the tally. "Who decided the first 3 weeks of your labor were worth nothing?" "The man who brought me from Galveston." She snatched up the bucket and turned toward the stalls before he could ask more. Moss leaned over the gate and tried for the broom again. Clara scolded him in a rapid stream of Polish. The gelding blinked offended and stepped back. Abner drank the rest of the cider. He had hired a woman to keep the kitchen mend what she could and help when calving began. He had not hired an unpaid prisoner, yet the mark on that brass tally said Frank Nash believed otherwise. Sutton Ranch was no great cattle kingdom. It was a stubborn spread of limestone, cedar, and winter grass that Abner had held together since his father died. His kin had remained long enough to see the final cattle note paid, then gone to easier places. From that, Abner had learned the wrong lesson. With perfect thoroughness, people stayed while duty bound them and left when the account was settled. He had managed the herd, the fences, and the house alone until his shoulder began grinding whenever the weather changed. With winter calving ahead, he had asked Henriette Reeves at the boarding house to find him a capable hired girl who could cook keep house and lend a hand in the barn when needed. Henriette had sent Clara. From her first morning, she had worked with a hard, breathless efficiency that made the rooms seem afraid to gather dust. She took the small chamber off the kitchen and tested the iron latch twice. The latch was on the inside. There was no keyhole on the outer door when Abner explained that her shoulders lowered by the smallest measure. She kept a frayed ledger in her apron. She would not eat bread until the stove was lit, the water hauled, and the floor swept. She paid for each meal with labor before allowing herself to taste it. She argued with the smoking stove, lectured the hens for hiding eggs, and moved Abner's flour from one shelf to another without permission. He told himself the rearranging vexed him. In truth, he had begun walking more slowly past the kitchen to hear her sing under her breath. The house had not held a woman's voice since his mother died. Clara's songs were unfamiliar, sometimes sad, sometimes brisk enough to make even the spoons sound busy. Abner never asked what the words meant. Asking would have admitted that he listened. One evening, while mending a flour sack, she told him what she meant to do with her wages. By the thaw, she wanted enough to rent a room in town and open a wash house with a small preserving kitchen. Ranch wives could send linens. Drovers could pay for shirts scrubbed clean. In winter, she would sell rye bread, pickled cabbage, and spiced apples. "I will not be a hired girl forever," she said. Abner nodded as though spring were a harmless thing. For the rest of the evening, the house seemed to echo with the future absence of her footsteps. On Clara's fourth day, freight wheels rattled into the frozen yard. She stopped at the sink. The plate in her hands did not move, but her whole body went rigid. She dried her fingers, closed her ledger, and stepped away from the window. Frank Nash entered without knocking, carrying cold air and a thick account book. His coat was good wool. His smile was the patient sort used by men who expected gratitude for every advantage they took. Sutton, making my rounds before the roads freeze. How was the winter girl? Clara stared at the table. Nash opened his book. You can send her first month's pay through me. There's the wagon fare from Galveston, 3 nights board, the placement fee translation, and the loyalty bond. Abner leaned against the doorframe. Clara's face had gone still, but he could see each shallow breath. She expected him to accept the list because Nash had written it in ink. A loyalty bond, Abner repeated. Standard protection. Keeps foreign girls from wandering away halfway through an agreement. If she fails here, I can move her to Fredericksburg and bring you another. Clara lifted her head. Her accent thickened when she was angry or afraid, and now it did both. I agreed to the wagon fare and Mrs. Reeves's bed. You said nothing of these other charges. It costs money to give a newcomer a start. Abner went to the tin box on the mantel, took out the envelope containing Clara's earned pay, and laid it on the table. He did not pass it to Nash. He looked at Clara. How much do you choose to pay him? Nash frowned. Your paper says the wages come to me. My paper says I pay for work. She did it. The money is hers. Abner kept his eyes on Clara. How much? For a moment she did not move. Then she drew the envelope toward herself. Her fingers trembled once and steadied. She counted the wagon fare and Henriette's true boarding charge onto the table. The rest went into her apron. That is my debt, she said. Nash gathered the coins. You bring a great deal of feed through my wagon, Sutton. A man who does not honor customary practice may find his freight dearer. Since when is loyalty measured by nights spent on a bedbug mattress? The laugh escaped Clara before she could stop it. She clapped a hand over her mouth, startled by her own sound. Nash shut his book with a crack and left. When the door slammed, Abner found himself staring at the place where Clara's laugh had been. He had known her 4 days. Already he wanted that sound protected. The knowledge unsettled him more than Nash's threat. We will buy another ledger, he said. You mark your days. I mark what I pay. No hidden columns. Clara's hand remained over the envelope in her apron. And if our numbers differ, then you will tell me I am wrong in 2 languages. Her mouth twitched. I may need 3. The blue norther tightened over the valley during the next 2 weeks. The friction between them did not vanish. It merely found warmer rooms in which to argue. Abner, determined not to treat Clara like a burdened servant, began rising an hour earlier. He broke the trough ice stacked firewood and measured the morning feed before she laced her boots. He believed he was sparing her. By the 3rd dawn, the look she gave the filled wood box told him she believed he was erasing her place. She found him in the barn, lifting a bale. I am not a porcelain plate, Mr. Sutton. Clara seized the other end. I am not an ornament for your kitchen. If you take every task, how am I to earn my keep? You cooked 3 meals yesterday, boiled the linens, and repaired a harness. The harness repair was crooked. It has been crooked since 1878. The mule has made peace with it. She nearly smiled, then tightened her grip. Let me carry the water. Before he could answer, she took the tin bucket from its hook. The cracked wooden handle split as she swung it toward the pump. A sharp edge cut across her palm. Clara gasped and hid the hand in her skirt. Let me see. It is nothing. Clara, I said, it is nothing. There is another bucket. She served breakfast left-handed with her right palm wrapped in a clean cloth. Abner ate in silence. He had meant to keep her from being worn down. Instead, he had threatened the one thing she trusted, her own usefulness, and driven her to prove it with blood. That night, after the latch slid across her bedroom door, Abner carried the broken bucket to the barn workbench. He cut a new handle from seasoned pecan and shaved it smooth. Then he wrapped the grip in soft oiled leather and fixed it with brass tacks. He measured the curve against his own hand, frowned, and narrowed it. Clara's hand was smaller. The thought of fitting the handle to her palm felt more intimate than it had any right to feel. He left the repaired bucket by the pump beside a pair of thick gloves he had scrubbed clean. No note, no request for thanks. At dawn, he watched from the tack room's shadows. Clara stopped beside the pump. She ran her bandaged hand over the leather grip, tried the balance, then looked across the empty yard. Her shoulders loosened before the day's work had even begun. She put on the gloves. Abner carried that small victory with him until breakfast, when he discovered she had salted his eggs so heavily that even Moss would have refused them. Clara watched him take one bite. A smooth handle does not erase stolen chores. Abner swallowed with dignity. I gathered that. The weather broke hard the following afternoon. Wind came down the limestone bluffs, and the temperature fell so fast that cedar limbs cracked like rifle shots. 3 calves arrived early, weak and shivering. The ranch narrowed to straw-warm mash lantern light, and the next breath each small body managed to take. Clara entered the barn with the repaired bucket braced against her hip. Abner knelt beside the weakest calf, trying to coax milk between its clenched teeth. I will take this one, she said. It is too cold. Go back to the house. Did you hire my brain, Abner, or only my hands to sweep? It was the first time she had used his given name. The sound of it stopped him more effectively than the broom had. He sat back on his heels. Put your hand against the ribs. Listen. If the breath rattles like water in a tin cup, keep him upright and moving. Clara knelt beside him. Her bandaged hand settled carefully against the calf. And if he kicks me, then he has strength enough to be rude. We celebrate. They worked for 6 hours. Clara learned how to judge the warmth inside a calf's mouth and how to rub life into cold legs. Abner learned that she would accept instruction when it was offered as knowledge instead of command. Near midnight, the weak calf finally stood. It swayed, sneezed warm mash onto Clara's shawl, and remained upright. She laughed again, tired, disbelieving, and free. Abner knew then that he was in trouble. He wanted to hear that laugh next winter. Wanting next winter from a woman who had already named the day she meant to leave was a foolishness he could neither work off nor pay down. The next morning, the thickest heel of rye bread waited on his plate. Moss is not permitted that piece, Clara said without looking at him. On account of his manners, on account of mine. They divided the night watches. Abner took the first turn with the calves. Clara took the second. A lantern in the kitchen window meant all was well. A lantern on the barn door meant the other person was needed. It became a language neither had planned. One light meant rest. The other meant come. By the third night, Abner's shoulder had locked. Fever burned behind his eyes, but he pulled on his canvas coat, intending to take Clara's watch so she might sleep. He reached the kitchen door and found it blocked. Clara stood in the frame with a straw broom across her body. In her other hand was the steaming mug from the first night. The lantern glowed behind her, and snow showed pale against the window. She looked exactly as she had in this barn, worried, stubborn, and prepared to defeat him with household tools. Move the broom, he said. No. The calves are asleep. I checked them. She pushed the mug toward him. Sit. If I sit, I may not rise again. Then I will enjoy the silence. Despite the fever, a laugh scraped out of him. Clara did not smile. Drink. He took the cider. I can add the extra watch to your pay. Her expression closed at once. You trust a debt more than kindness, Abner. The cup warmed his palms. That is not true. It is. A debt has an ending. A man can settle it and watch the other person leave. Kindness has no account book, so you do not know what to do with it. The words found the exact place he kept hidden beneath work. His relatives had gone when the cattle note was paid. Hired men had gone when the season ended. Even grief had behaved like an account, a funeral, a mortgage, a final signature, then an empty house. Clara lowered the broom. When the thaw comes, I will take the freight wagon into town. Henrietta says there may be a room near the mercantile. I will open my wash house. The kitchen seemed to widen around Abner. He could already hear the silence that would follow her. He wanted to offer double wages, free lodging, half the smokehouse, anything that would give her a practical reason to remain. But money used to keep a frightened woman was still a lock even when the door stood open. What do you need? He asked. Clara blinked. For the wash house. What do you need to begin? Her surprise showed in the way her grip eased on the broom. Lye soap, canvas sacks, 2 kettles larger than yours, shelves for preserves, a place to practice boiling full loads without ruining Mrs. Reeves's floor. My smokehouse is empty. I did not ask for charity. I did not offer it. I said the smokehouse is empty. He drank the cider. We can discuss rent after I am no longer seeing 2 of you. For the first time, Clara touched his sleeve without necessity. Only 2 fingers, brief and careful. Sit down before both of me strike you. He sat. 2 weeks later, the hard freeze loosened. Town held a stockman's supper near Henriette's boarding house, part trade day and part celebration for every calf horse and fool who had survived the ice. Abner drove Clara in with her locked trunk behind the seat. She had packed it the night before. He did not ask whether she meant to move that day. Respect, he was learning, could feel remarkably like fear when silence was all it allowed him. Frank Nash waited near the freight scales. As Clara climbed down, he stepped in front of her trunk. Your account still carries the loyalty bond. Pay it, or I take you to the kitchen in Fredericksburg. They need a girl. Henriette came off the porch with her own book in hand. Her board was not half what you claimed, Frank. I checked every night and meal. Nash ignored her. He reached for the trunk handle. Abner caught his wrist before his fingers closed around it. You do not touch what is not yours, Abner said. The yard went quiet. Nash's face reddened. Abner released him at once, though every hard part of him wanted to do more. He stepped beside Clara, not in front of her. If you threaten her person or her property, you answer to me, he said. The account, however, is hers to answer. He drew Clara's wage envelope from his coat and placed it in her hand. Her time is her own. Nash rubbed his wrist. Then your feed rate rises come spring. A ranch that survived this winter will survive an honest freight rate. Clara opened the envelope. Her hands were steady now. She counted out the agreed wagon fare and nothing more. This settles what I owe, she said. There is no loyalty bond. I am not flour to be hauled wherever you can sell me twice. I will work at Sutton Ranch through the winter because I choose to. After that, I will work where I choose. Nash looked around at the ranchers watching him. Several had begun studying his account book with new suspicion. He pocketed the coins and walked away. Abner had likely lost his cheapest freight route. Clara's trunk remained locked. Yet when she climbed back onto the wagon beside him, the distance between them felt cleaner than before. He had not purchased her freedom. He had stood close enough for her to use it. They rode halfway home before Clara spoke. You held his wrist very tightly. He mistook your trunk for his property. And if he had reached for my ledger, I might have forgotten my Christian upbringing. You have one, Henriette claims so. Clara looked out at the thawing road, but he saw the smile she tried to hide. The next morning, she found him mending a bridle in the barn. I wish to rent the smokehouse, she announced. It is empty. That is why I wish to rent it. I will buy my own lye sacks, kettles, and jars. $1 each week. She held up a silver coin. Write it in the ledger. Abner set down the awl. The west roof leaks. Then the landlord will mend it. The landlord has a damaged shoulder. The tenant has a broom and no sympathy. Harsh terms, honest ones. He took the coin. Agreed. During the next week, the ranch changed its rhythm. Clara boiled test loads in the smokehouse, scrubbed canvas preserved cabbage, and baked dark rye loaves for the final supper of the season. Abner repaired only the roof boards she marked. When he needed to enter, he knocked twice on the doorframe and waited. The first time Clara called, "Come." The second time she called, "If you have moved my soap, remain outside and prepare to confess." He had not moved it. He stayed outside long enough to make her wonder. She emerged with flour on her cheek and suspicion in her eyes. Abner discovered that teasing her was dangerous because it made him want the easy domestic future he had once trained himself not to imagine. One evening, his shoulder failed while he was lifting a feed sack over the rail. Clara appeared with 2 lanterns. She hung one on the barn door, their sign that help was needed, though he was already standing before her. Without speaking, she took the lower end of the sack. "The calf cannot pay you for this," she murmured. Abner looked at her in the lantern glow. Months earlier, he would have denied the pain and carried the sack alone. Now he let his end drop until the weight balanced between them. "I know." They lifted together. Afterward, he did something harder. He left the final 2 stalls for morning and walked back to the house beside her. Work unfinished had once felt like failure. With Clara, it began to feel like a promise that there would be another day, and that both of them expected to meet it. By the full thaw, the communal barn beside the freight yard was crowded for the last stockman's supper. Clara's plank table held neatly bundled laundry sacks, jars of spiced apples, pickled cabbage, and loaves of rye bread dark as walnut wood. She had written prices in careful English. Beneath them, in smaller Polish letters, she had written something Abner could not read. "What does that line say?" he asked. "That the proprietor refuses foolish bargaining." A ranch wife nearby laughed and paid the marked price. Clara sold every jar before the second hour. She took orders for spring linens and arranged 2 weekly collection days. Abner stayed away from the table unless she asked him to lift something. It was the most difficult, useful thing he had ever done. Near the end of the evening, Henriette brought Clara a brass key. "The room above the mercantile is ready," she said. "You may move in tomorrow. The back stair is yours, and there is space below for customers to leave bundles." Clara held the key in her palm. Abner saw how still she became. He knew what it represented because she had named it beside the fire wages, kept a room, rented a business no broker could move. Clara closed her fingers around the key and thanked Henriette. Then she turned away from Abner. She took one slow step toward the side doors, then another. Abner's chest hollowed. The room above the mercantile, her packed trunk, and the spring road assembled themselves into a future without her. He had promised he would not call her back, merely because losing her hurt. He held to that promise for 1 breath, then a second. Clara stopped near the open doors and looked down at the key. When she finally turned toward him, he could not tell whether she had come to make an arrangement or say goodbye. A cattle buyer glanced toward her emptying table. "Your winter girl has done well, Sutton? How much does the ranch take? Not a cent." Abner's answer carried across the nearby tables. "The work is Clara Granger's. So is the money. The man lifted both hands and turned away. Clara crossed the remaining distance toward Abner. The key stayed enclosed in her fist. "You are very proud of announcing what you do not own," she said. "I have been slow to learn the distinction. Henriette says I can move tomorrow." "I heard." He looked toward the open doors rather than at her. "I will bring the wagon. Your trunk is too heavy for her buggy. You are very eager to load my trunk." He finally faced her. Every useful answer deserted him. The truth was all that remained, and it frightened him because it could not be earned back once spoken. "I do not need a winter girl," he said. "I need help, yes. But that is not why I want you to stay." Clara waited. Abner forced himself not to reach for her hand until she chose to offer it. "I want Clara Granger at my table when the snow is gone. I want your songs in the kitchen and your orders in the barn. I want to know what the Polish line beneath your prices truly says. And I want the right to court you if you can choose this ranch without surrendering the life you came here to build." The barn noise seemed to fall back, though it did not disappear. Clara searched his face. Abner let her. He had spent years treating need as the only honest reason for anyone to stay. Now he was asking for something no work agreement could guarantee. "Are you asking a hired hand," she said, "or a woman with the power to refuse a woman with the power to refuse?" His voice roughened. "The only woman who has ever made me want to put the work down before dark." Clara's fingers closed around his. "I will take Henriette's room," she said. For one terrible second, Abner's chest went hollow again. Then her thumb moved over his knuckles. "I will use it on Tuesdays and Fridays, so customers may leave bundles in town," she continued. "But I will not move my trunk there. I will keep the smokehouse, pay honest rent, share the chores, and allow you to court me slowly." Abner breathed again. "You will not carry my work to prove you care for me," she added. "I may carry half when I ask. And when the bucket handle breaks, you may repair it. You are gifted with buckets." He laughed. "Those are severe courtship terms. They are honest ones." Agreed. They did not kiss before the crowd. Clara squeezed his hand once, then turned with him toward her table. Together they packed the empty baskets and the few remaining laundry bundles. She kept the brass key and arranged with Henriette for the first collection day. For the first time, Abner did not hear a key as the sound of someone leaving. The next morning, Henriette's buggy rolled into the ranch yard while Abner and Clara were finishing breakfast. She hurried up the porch steps with Clara's agreement in one hand and several freight receipts folded inside a letter. After what happened at supper, 3 ranchers refused to renew their spring hauling accounts, she said. They carried their receipts to the freight yard office and demanded that the clerk compare Nash's copies with theirs before another contract was signed. I took Clara's agreement as well. Clara rose from the table. Henriette spread the papers beside the stove. The figures did not match. Nash entered Abner's agreement as a full winter placement, but Clara's paper lists only a 3-week trial at Sutton Ranch before transfer to Fredericksburg. He meant to collect a season's fee here, call her first 3 weeks unpaid training, and then collect another placement fee there. Clara stared at the papers. The room went silent, except for the stove. Henriette tapped the copied receipts. "Those 3 ranchers have withdrawn their accounts. 2 others intend to do the same. Nash will not be placing workers through my house again." Abner remembered the brass tally beneath Clara's boot. 3 weeks unpaid. The threat in the barn had not been her imagination. It had been Nash's plan. "I knew my paper named Fredericksburg," Clara said. "Nash told me this ranch was only a trial, and that you had agreed to withhold the first wages. I feared that if I objected, he would put me back on the wagon before I could earn enough to leave him." Abner rested one hand on the porch rail. "Why did you stay after the first night?" Clara looked toward the small bedroom off the kitchen. "Because the latch was on the inside." and you did not keep a key." The answer struck him harder than any declaration could have. What had seemed to him like the absence of a lock had been to her the first proof that she could close a door and still remain free. Nash's deception had brought her to the wrong ranch for the wrong reasons. Nothing built afterward belonged to him. Abner took the slate used for feed orders, drew a line down the middle, and hung it beside the kitchen door. On his side he wrote, "Calves fence wood." He handed Clara the chalk. She wrote, "Wash house orders, preserves." Then after a moment she added cider beneath both columns. "Shared work," Abner asked. "Shared sense," she replied. "You cannot be trusted with fever." An hour later they entered the barn together. Sunlight crossed the snow-dusted windows. The lanterns sat on the workbench, the repaired bucket waited by the pump, and Moss watched from his stall, with the calculating look of a horse planning theft. Clara took up the pitchfork. Abner lifted the bucket. Habit made him reach for her tool as well. She raised one eyebrow. He stopped, looked at his hand, and withdrew it. Half when asked, "Your memory improves?" Moss leaned over the gate and caught the fringe of Clara's shawl. She scolded him in Polish. Abner laughed and stepped beside her rather than ahead. The work stayed hard, but Abner no longer carried winter or life alone.